Doing something a little bit different this week. Here at the end of the year, we're going to look forward to next month's new legislature and the freshly elected Congress, and we'll start stateside by talking to the leaders of the new administration in St. Paul, which was busy this week announcing commissioners. DFL Governor-elect Tim Walz, Minnesota's first non-metro governor since Rudy Perpich 3 decades ago. Lieutenant Governor-to-be Peggy Flanagan, state's first Native American ever elected to statewide office. Thank you both for taking time out of your busy schedules. Say, Governor-elect, you look at the political parties as kind of a loose collection of special interests, and I was just writing down, as you pick a cabinet, political interest, geographic, racial, gender, sexual orientation, interest group. How do you fit all of that into getting a representative and effective cabinet?
Yeah, the idea of inclusion, and certainly it comes back to that theme of one Minnesota. We want to make sure that everybody has that seat at the table. I think the biggest thing and the concern that Lieutenant Governor-elect Flanagan and I had as we built this team, that people would come through that front door, would feel there were no barriers to why they could apply or how they would apply, and then pick the best qualified candidate. And we believe that when you get this inclusion, you end up expanding your pool of potential candidates, and they will rise to the top. And I think today we're very proud of the first slate that's starting to roll out this week.
Tell me a little bit about the thought process behind making the finalists' names public, not only the one who is the commissioner, but others.
Absolutely. Well, we have a real commitment to being transparent, and it's something that we heard all across the state on the listening tour during the campaign, that people wanted to feel engaged and involved. And so by having that front door, by letting folks know how to apply, but we also felt like people should know about that deep, deep pool. All of the finalists are really high-quality folks, and I think they reflect a whole swath of Minnesotans and values, and we wanted people to feel like they're a part of it.
I know some of the appointments could get a little sticky. I'm thinking the PUC is one agency that might be kind of tough. Enbridge clearly is a very difficult subject. I know that you're not a big fan of the Enbridge pipeline, and I know that protesters were at the Capitol. So when you pick new PUC commissioners, how are you going to walk that line?
Well, I think, again, it's like on any of these appointments is making sure we have people who are going to follow science and data, people who are committed to our vision of servant leadership, that you're there to learn and listen, and that you're hiring or picking for communicators who are going to have meaningful engagement with all of the communities involved. And what we've seen, we're not going to be able to please everyone, but the one thing we should never do is surprise them. The one thing we should never do is have them feel like they're not heard. And as people are thinking about how we're getting these commissioners in place, a lot of the meetings we're having are with stakeholders who are telling us what they want to see. So those protesters coming, we're inviting them in. They are a voice that needs to be heard, as well as the people advocating for the pipeline, advocating for somewhere in between.
Your slogan of One Minnesota obviously was very effective. It helped, I think, propel you to the governor's office. But why not go out to Washington and meet with President Trump? I was looking at the vote totals. Rounding up, you got 1.4 million. But he got more than 1.3 million votes, and that there are a lot of folks, even in your old congressional district, that would say, go out there and meet the president and say, respect him, and say, we respect the office.
No, first of all, it had nothing to do with whether I agree or disagree with the president. It happened at a time when we had meetings scheduled with a very diverse group of folks that needed to come in and had scheduled around that. They told us when we were going to go out there were no cabinet members present, and it was a 10-minute meeting with 13 people in the room. That would have involved a pretty big expense now that we have some folks who travel with us, to get them all out there to do that, to do a 10-minute meeting at the White House where we weren't able to talk about why it was for Minnesota. So this is not about disrespecting that. This is about, and I go when I'm asked to go. We fully expect to engage, and we have already started to make contact with some of the cabinet officials to make sure that we're engaging with them. So this is not a place of disrespecting that. And we very graciously declined the invitation only because of scheduling and the work that needed to be done here.
There's a lot of people to talk to, obviously. I'm thinking that I believe you talked to former Lieutenant Governor Tina Smith, now U.S. Senator, about the job. What did she tell you?
Well, she's been a friend and mentor of mine. I'll be honest, when we had our first conversation about this being a possibility, she's the first person that I called. She said, I'm going to put on a pot of coffee and let's take a walk around the lake. And I think, the conversation that we had was really grounded in the kind of impact that I would be able to make and we would be able to make together. And Governor Mark Dayton and Tina Smith changed the way that this office operates. And had it not been for her leadership, I don't know that I would be sitting here on this couch. We've done everything as a partnership and have tried to build on the foundation that they laid. And I have a lot of hope for what this role can be. And, she's certainly on speed dial if I have questions. And she's just been a tremendous friend through this whole process.
Well, you're seen as kind of the conduit to the lefty elements of the party, aren't you? I mean,
well, I also think that, I've done a lot of work over the last 2 decades around advocacy and organizing work. I'm really proud of the work that I did at Children's Defense Fund with folks on both sides of the aisle because 2 years in the life of a child is a really long time. So we couldn't wait for Democrats to be in power, Republicans to be in power. We had work to do for kids. And I think that's how I also view our time in office.
If I could, I think this relationship and strengths of understanding what we expect out of leadership and commissioners is when we're interviewing these folks, talking to them about how will you hire people around to make up where you have weaknesses or the strengths. But one of the things I expected out of Lieutenant Governor-elect Flanagan was to become very fluent in the language of veterans, being very fluent in agricultural issues, very fluent in conservation issues that she dealt with in the legislature, but not to get this case about, well, if there's a left-leaning issue or an issue of inclusion and equity, I better be fluent in that, and I better have the connections as much as she should. So I think it was a learning process. I think I have become more fluent in understanding and probably more grounded in why it's so important, and I hope that has been the same on the veterans issues or ag issues.
And kind of interesting because a former state lawmaker, you're kind of a conduit then to lawmakers.
Yes.
And do you see yourself taking a more active stance then when it comes to negotiating with leadership?
Well, I certainly think that I'm going to bring my skill set into the work. And, I think that the most exciting part about this right now is 2 folks are better than 1, and so we have the ability to get a lot of work done together, and I absolutely expect to be part of those conversations, and I think that's the plan.
The new transportation commissioner designate is the former Speaker of the House, Margaret Anderson Kelleher, who did a pretty good job ramrodding the last big comprehensive transportation package. So her appointment as transportation commissioner says what to the state about your intent in that issue area?
Yeah, with an understanding that we need to do a good job of talking to the people of Minnesota, which we think we did during the campaign of why infrastructure investments across Minnesota, multimodal, matters, but then understanding that there is also the policy position and then there's the politics of this. And if you can have someone who is both a good manager and, of course, incoming Commissioner Margaret Anderson Kelleher has great experience, especially in greater Minnesota, with broadband and some of the technology challenge that we've had as she worked on the High-Tech Commission. And so I think it's telling them that we understand that this is complex. We understand there's a lot of voices. We understand that it's going to take someone who knows how to negotiate both the legislature and greater Minnesota and the Twin Cities together, and I think Margaret possesses all of those. As I said, we are quite proud of the fact that we now have a governor and a incoming commissioner of transportation who are both Mankato West Scarlets, and so that is a trivia point that we have been telling people. But I think that's why, and I think that message is that we're willing to work, we're willing to have a skilled and negotiator. And again, I think at her time in the legislature, Margaret also served 10 years on transportation finance and understands it.
When it comes to the state agencies, one of the most interesting agencies to watch, because there are so many constituencies involved, is the DNR. Mm-hmm. And so do you look to the current commissioner, and is that a holdover from the Dayton administration for you, do you think, or are you looking at somebody else?
Well, again, there's been only one door, and that's the front door. And so all commissioners who are interested in continuing with the administration have been asked to reapply. And so we have a very robust process. And, there's certain qualities and skills that we're looking for. And, I think that's guiding our vision for that role and every other role.
And at the time of this airing, just quite candidly, that is an agency that has not come up yet in front of us, that we're still doing work on it. And I think in all candidness is one of the things we asked of Lieutenant Governor-elect Flanagan's advisory committee. One of them was to amplify this message to all parts of Minnesota to start unearthing candidates. Many of these folks who have come in front of me, I have never personally met before they got to that position. And you saw some of that today. Some were people we knew, some were new because of their expertise of where they were working. And the DNR is one of those that is still coming, but as the Lieutenant Governor-elect said, the door is open. We took a lot of applications, and I think it'll be a diverse field, and we'll make sure we get the right person for Minnesota.
Myron Frand stays on as management and budget, and of course, for your first budget, I think that makes total sense to have a continuity there. What are the demands versus the cash available? Is it 3, 4, 5 to 1 as far as what people want and what we can afford?
I think it's always probably that, but people are looking for, what we said on the campaign trail is we needed to do budgeting in a much more open and transparent manner, and we needed to set and decide as Minnesotans that budget is a fiscal document and it is a moral document, and to decide together what we want to see and what we want out of the state. So if this is what our education product looks like across the whole spectrum from pre-K to paths to jobs and careers and lifelong learning, then we need to look at that. We need to come up with what some of those numbers are. We need to figure out how to best deliver that, and then we need to put that into the budget. And with an understanding that Governor Dayton's legacy, one of them is turning around a fiscal situation that was in tough shape, and that had to do with numerous decisions that were made. It also had to do with an economy that was moving towards recession. With that being said, we get the opportunity to start in fiscally solid position. Our responsibility to keep it there, but to also move forward on those things we believe that keeps the state moving forward: investments in education, investments in healthcare, and investments in prosperous communities and families. And I think that's what we're weighing. But you're right. If it were unlimited, you would continue to look. But I don't think that's what we're not looking at unlimited. We're looking at results. What are the results we want to see? If it's graduation rates, if it's job placement, we need to know what those measures are.
And if I'm not mistaken, education is one of that's in your wheelhouse.
I'm a recovering school board member from Minneapolis Public Schools. Tim is a teacher. And something that we talk about a lot is that children and families don't come in pieces. So as we're looking at the budget, we want to look at how it works across agencies, across education, healthcare, transportation, childcare, and really looking at that big picture. As we did our tour across the state, we had 23 stops, 2,100 miles. We split up sometimes. We joined forces for others. What we heard consistently from people was that people care tremendously about our way of life and want to make sure that our children, our elders, families have what they need. We've got good roads. And that was if we were in Mankato or up at Boys Fort or in North Minneapolis. These were the things that we heard consistently.
I have to ask you about, you're talking about transparency, that this is a word for the administration that you've used repeatedly. I'm curious about this, and this happened recently. You probably heard about this. Capitol reporters are trying to ask a question of the current lieutenant governor, and one of her security detail got a little testy and put hands on two reporters. And I'm curious, tell me a little bit about your general philosophy on dealing with the media. Was that incident indicative of maybe more aggressive attempts at reining in the media, perhaps?
Well, I can't speak to that individual situation, but I can tell you, and those who've covered me, and I think Lieutenant Governor-elect Flanagan as a legislator, certainly my time in Congress, we always saw that our accessibility to the press was a requirement of the job, that we weren't doing you a favor by coming off the House floor and answering how we voted on a big vote, that was a requirement to try and drop the barriers, that the answer should always be to answer the questions, and if it's as convenient as we can possibly make it, for the media to do it, not as conveniently as possible for us. And so I hope we're continuing to stay on that. I think it's your responsibility to keep us to that. It's your responsibility to ask those questions and continue to ask till you get what you feel is a satisfactory answer. You might not agree with it, but I think that's what it is. So I hope we've started out with that. I hope in the way that we're conducting this search, because going back to that question about releasing the finalists, I don't take that lightly. These are highly qualified professionals who either have clients or have constituencies or have jobs or have boards that they report to. In many cases, in some cases, billion-dollar budgets that are out there that they're dealing with, and they've chosen to serve the state of Minnesota, and you put yourself out there and they didn't get the job. Does that send a message? And I think Lieutenant Governor-elect was right. It sends a message that there are incredibly talented people in Minnesota, and we're looking for skills that you may possess in a certain area, but that is not exactly right to fit into that job or into the cabinet. And so we'll be as open and as transparent as we can possibly be. And I think I want to be judged by that, because I think especially now, and I've been saying this 12 years ago when I got to Congress, and I think it came from being a government social studies teacher at the time. Now I think we all know why it's more important than ever to see the press as foundational to the democracy, not as an impediment. So.
Did you waded into the Chamber of Commerce, a woman business group, I think, right after the election, and they seem a little skittish maybe about the sick leave, child, all these issues that may be mandated from St. Paul under your leadership. What was that dynamic like, and how'd you come away from that with what?
For sure. Well, I think, first and foremost, I'm coming to talk to a women's luncheon in business, and there are a lot of moms.
Should small business be afraid?
I don't think so. I mean, I think, I'm a mom, and that is a lens through which I see my world. But I also know that, we shouldn't have situations where families have to choose between taking care of a new baby or an adopted child and a sick loved one and a paycheck. I think it is good for small business. It's good for business overall to have access to things like paid family and medical leave. It's good for the workforce, retention of staff. And we want to find solutions where we're bringing folks in the chamber together with small business owners and communities to say, how do we have a situation here, can get to a solution where we've got healthier communities, grounded in sound child development, where businesses are also winners. I think we can do that.
And I think this point about our hope is it's not a mandate. It's better as a partnership and to understand, to go out. And I think Lieutenant Governor-elect Flanagan's was out there in that spirit. And I think the feedback was really good. And we understand, and I think we were very deliberate on our tour. We went to places and picked out places where we got beat pretty badly electorally.
That's right.
Because we need to hear from them, not just to try and win them over, but to understand why they didn't vote for us. What was there, and what in their communities did they think the message that our opponent was delivering was better for them, to understand that.
Final question. The first time we were on the show post-election, we asked you about the inauguration. Of course, it was just so new you didn't have plans. Do you have plans now?
Yeah.
We do. It's on the 7th of January, 11 a.m. I believe it's at the Fitzgerald Theater. That is starting to, as far as I know, shape itself up. We'll be going over to the Capitol. Is that correct?
From 3 to 5, there'll be a public reception that day. Everyone is invited, and we'll have a big party on the 12th. And folks are invited to that, too.
And then it's going to be a traveling party to Greater One, Minnesota.
That's right.
You hope we see you occasionally down here on the couch. Thanks a lot.
We'd be glad to come back.
Great to see you.
Thank you all.
Congratulations.
Yeah, you
all
too.
the best.
Thanks.